I'm Natalie, 29 years old, and I've spent most of my life watching my family celebrate from the sidelines, always hoping that one day they would finally make room for me again. On New Year's Eve, I walked up to my father's house with gifts I had saved for each one wrapped with care, carrying more hope than I wanted to admit. I thought maybe a new year could mean a new start. But when the door opened, my sister's eyes told me everything before her words even landed. She rolled them at me like I was nothing, and with a voice cold enough to sting, she said I wasn't wanted. Behind her, laughter and music filled the house, my family raising glasses. Without even noticing, I stood outside. That night should have ended with me walking away into the snow, but instead it cracked something open. Secrets, lies, and betrayals began to unravel, and what I discovered after that moment changed everything I thought I knew about them and about myself. Would you have knocked again or kept walking? Stay with me because this story will make you question where true family really lies. Let me take you back to where it began. Snow was falling in soft sheets across the quiet streets of Greenwood as I pulled my Honda into a space a block away from my father's house. The dashboard clock read 9:30. My palms were damp against the steering wheel despite the cold outside. I sat for a moment with the engine running, staring at the rows of warm lights strung across the Tudor-style home that had once felt like mine, too. Laughter spilled out faintly into the night, rising above the muffled music. I had wrapped every gift with careful folds, tied ribbons the way my mother had taught me, and I had chosen a bottle of red wine that was nice enough not to be mocked, but not extravagant either. All of it sat neatly in a bag on the passenger seat. I wiped my palms on my dress. It was forest green long sleeves, the same one my friend Sophia once said made the gold in my eyes stand out. I had clipped my brown hair into a loose bun secured with a pearl pin that used to belong to my maternal grandmother. For hours, I had gone back and forth about what to wear, telling myself not to look like I was trying too hard, but not to give anyone a reason to whisper either. I wanted tonight to be about reconnection, about maybe starting over as the clock ticked toward a new year. Gathering my courage, I reached for the bag of gifts, stepped out into the cold, and crunched across the shoveled walkway. The wreath on the door was enormous red ribbon gleaming under the porch light. I shifted the gifts in my arms and pressed the bell. Inside, I heard the familiar chime echo through the hallway, then the sound of footsteps. The door opened. My sister Rebecca stood there, framed by the glow of the chandelier behind her. She was in a fitted silver dress, her blonde hair in polished waves that looked straight out of a magazine spread. For half a second, her eyes flickered in surprise. Then her expression hardened the way it always did when she looked at me. "Natalie," she said flatly, my name tasting sour in her mouth. Her gaze dropped to the bag of gifts, then back to my face. She rolled her eyes so sharply it felt like a slap. "We don't want you here." I froze. The words hung in the air, cutting through the muffled sound of music and laughter. My mouth went dry. I swallowed and forced my voice to stay even. "Dad invited me." Rebecca leaned against the doorframe, perfectly composed. "Dad is busy. Everyone is busy. Go spend the night somewhere else." She started to close the door, but I caught a glimpse past her shoulder. The dining room was bright, the long table crowded with plates of food and glasses raised in mid-toast. My father sat at the head tilted back in laughter at something Uncle Frederick had said. Allison and Bradley leaned toward one another, clinking glasses. Patricia stood near the kitchen, wiping her hands with a towel, smiling faintly. My grandmother was at the far end, frail but present, her hair pinned in its usual bun. None of them looked toward the door. None of them saw me standing there. The weight of the gifts in my arms grew heavier. My throat tightened, but I forced my lips into something resembling a smile. "Got it," I whispered. The words came out rough, almost swallowed by the cheer from inside. I turned and walked back down the steps, the cold air biting at my face. Snowflakes landed on my lashes and melted into tears I refused to let fall. My boots crunched on the sidewalk as I moved faster away from the house that still smelled of roast and cinnamon. At the curb, I fumbled with the keys, my fingers stiff. I slid into the driver's seat and shut the door, the silence of the car pressing around me. My breath came fast, fogging the windshield. I dropped the bag of gifts onto the passenger seat. The brooch for Grandma Martha, the scarf for Rebecca, the Italian cookbook for Patricia, all of them gleamed mockingly under the interior light. My phone buzzed against my coat pocket. I pulled it out with trembling hands. Sophia's name lit the screen. I stared at it, my chest aching. For a moment I considered answering, hearing her voice, letting myself break down. But instead I pressed the button to silence it. I leaned my head back against the headrest, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles whitened. Through the windshield, I caught one last glimpse of the house. The windows glowed gold shadows moving as people laughed and celebrated. Midnight was still 2 hours away, but inside that house the new year had already begun without me. I turned the key, the engine hummed, and I let the car idle as the snow thickened on the glass. I told myself not to cry. I told myself I had expected this, that Rebecca would never truly allow me in. But the sting of being turned away at my father's door on New Year's Eve cut deeper than I imagined. I shifted into drive, pulled away from the curb, and watched the house shrink in the rearview mirror until it was nothing but a blur of lights against the falling snow. When I was a child, New Year's Eve meant staying up late with my cousins, while Grandma Martha poured sparkling cider into plastic cups and told us stories about how she and Grandpa used to dance until sunrise. I can still see the twinkle lights strung around the living room, the smell of her sugar cookies filling the house, and my father lifting me onto his shoulders as the countdown reached its final seconds. Back then I belonged. Back then I was part of something. The memories came rushing back as I drove aimlessly through the snowy streets that night. Each turn seemed to bring me closer to places that reminded me of what I had lost. There was the old skating rink, where Rebecca and I once clung to the rail together, laughing as we tried to keep our balance. A few blocks later, I passed the park where we had picnicked one summer, chasing after Bradley as he tried to fly a too-heavy kite. Even through the fog of the present, those images of simpler times tugged at me, sweet and painful all at once. Everything started to unravel when I was 12. My mother, Linda, had found text messages on my father's phone from a woman named Patricia. The discovery shattered what little peace was left in our house. The divorce that followed was ugly, filled with slammed doors and whispered phone calls I was never meant to hear. I remember lying awake at night listening to my mother cry in the next room, clutching my pillow as if it could shield me. When the papers were signed, my father moved into a new house in Greenwood with Patricia. Within months they were married. I remember standing outside the church dressed in a second-hand dress that didn't quite fit, watching as my father kissed his new bride. Rebecca, already a teenager, stood proudly beside them, while I felt like an extra no one wanted in the picture. My Aunt Eleanor had once been the gatekeeper of my father's side of the family, but as Patricia settled in, it was Rebecca who took up that mantle. My sister had always been polished, confident, and quick with words. She slipped seamlessly into that new life, while I went home with Mom to our 2-bedroom apartment in Stamford, where every dollar mattered. Mom picked up extra shifts at the hospital, often coming home after midnight, still in her scrubs, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. She made sure I had what I needed, even if it meant going without herself. When I think about strength, I think of her carrying me through those years. Meanwhile, every family photo from my father's house looked like a magazine spread. Matching outfits, shiny cars, and the driveway vacations in places I only saw on postcards. I still received invitations at first. Birthdays, a few holidays, though they often came late or sounded more like obligations than genuine welcome. At 14, I walked into Thanksgiving dinner in a dress I had saved up for with babysitting money. Before I could even take off my coat, Rebecca glanced at me and smirked. "Do you need money for a proper dress?" she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. The room chuckled politely. Patricia smiled tightly and changed the subject, but the humiliation burned hot in my chest. By high school, the invitations came less and less. "We thought you'd be busy with your mother. We assumed you had other plans." Excuses wrapped in civility but sharp underneath. In reality, plans were never the issue. It was the silent message that I was never really wanted. When I earned a scholarship to New York University, I thought maybe they would finally see me differently. I graduated in graphic design, worked part-time jobs to cover what the scholarship didn't, and carried myself with pride, knowing every step I took was built from my own effort. But even then, I remained invisible. The Christmas after college was the last one I attended. I was 23, fresh out of school, clutching gifts I had saved weeks to afford. For 3 hours, I answered questions about why I chose something as unstable as design instead of medicine like Allison. I smiled through the comparisons, but when I slipped into the kitchen to get more water, I overheard Rebecca tell Patricia she didn't know why Dad kept inviting me. She claimed Mom had poisoned me against them anyway. Neither of them corrected her. No one defended me. That was the night I stopped saying yes. The years that followed were marked by silence. My father would text me on my birthday sometimes, on Thanksgiving, always brief. How is work, he would ask, as if he had forgotten. I had been with the same agency for years, as if my projects and late nights were just footnotes. He had no interest in reading. So when his message arrived 3 weeks before this New Year's Eve, I froze. It was simple, almost casual. Dinner at the house, 3 o'clock. Grandma has been asking about you. Would be nice if you could make it. I stared at it for a long time, weighing hope against history. I called Mom. Honey, she said, you know, I'll support whatever you decide, but protect your heart. They haven't exactly earned your trust. I chewed on her words, torn between self-preservation and the small voice inside me that still longed for belonging. Grandma Martha is getting older, I whispered. Maybe this is my chance to see her before it's too late. Mom sighed, the kind of sigh that comes from years of watching your child ache. Just remember, you have people who love you without conditions. You don't need approval from anyone who hasn't earned the right to give it. I held on to that, but still pressed yes on my phone when Dad asked if I could come. I told myself this would be different, that people change, that maybe family could stitch itself back together when the calendar turned toward a new year. Those memories weighed heavy on me as I pulled my car through the quiet streets that night, the snow deepening on the windshield. Each streetlight illuminated the past, 1,000 small wounds that had led me to this moment of being turned away on the doorstep. I drove past the ice cream shop where Dad once bought me a cone after soccer practice. Past the elementary school where Allison had played an angel in the Christmas play while I sat in the back row next to Mom, clapping too loudly just to be heard. Every landmark reminded me how far I had been pushed out of their circle. When I reached the edge of town, the road opened onto a frozen lake, the surface dusted in snow. I pulled over and killed the engine, the silence pressing down on me. My breath fogged the glass as I leaned forward, pressing my forehead against the steering wheel. For a moment, I let myself remember the sound of Grandma's voice reading from the worn copy of The Night Before Christmas, the rumble of her laugh, the way she always made me feel like I was enough. That was the tether that had pulled me here tonight, and that was the same tether that now felt frayed beyond repair. The clock on the dashboard ticked past 10 each minute, echoing the truth I didn't want to admit. I had been a fool to believe things would be different. I was still that 12-year-old girl standing outside the church watching her father build a new life without her. And no matter how many times I told myself I was stronger now, the ache of being left behind never fully went away. I sat there in the dark, staring at the frozen lake, wondering if I had been wrong to hope at all. Rebecca had always been the star in our family, the one who knew how to shine in any room she entered. Even when we were kids, she carried herself like she was older than me, more important somehow, and as adults, that gap only widened. She worked as a marketing manager at Sterling Pharma, a company with gleaming glass offices on the edge of Westport. Her job gave her a title, people respected a salary that let her lease a silver BMW and a wardrobe filled with tailored dresses that seemed to announce her success before she even spoke. By comparison, my work as a freelance graphic designer looked flimsy to them. I knew it because of the way my father's eyes glazed when I explained a project, or because Patricia's smile turned polite when I mentioned working from home. They loved to brag about Rebecca's product launches and conference trips. I could practically hear them wondering when I would give up my silly little projects and get a real career. It wasn't only work that Rebecca used to draw a line between us. She also controlled the family group chat, the digital thread that connected dinners, holidays, birthdays. At first, I thought it was a kind gesture, her way of keeping everyone organized. But slowly, I realized that what appeared in the chat and what actually happened in the family were often two different things. I remembered one summer when Allison graduated from medical school. I had expected to be invited, after all she was my cousin too, but I never saw a message. Later, Rebecca claimed she had sent one and maybe I had missed it. By the time I saw pictures on social media of everyone dressed up at the ceremony, I knew the truth. It was the same pattern over and over. Messages would vanish. Plans would shift without me knowing. When I asked about Thanksgiving one year, Rebecca sent a breezy text saying the family assumed I would be with Mom. On another occasion, she claimed she had texted me the address of a dinner, but I had never received it. I tried not to take it personally until the day I stumbled across undeniable proof. It happened last year when I was scrolling through Facebook. Allison had posted an album titled Thanksgiving at Home. The photos showed the dining room in Greenwood, the same chandelier glowing overhead, the table crowded with dishes, cousins laughing in their holiday sweaters. My father was smiling at the head of the table. Patricia had her hand resting on his shoulder. And there in the corner sat Rebecca, phone in hand, clearly the one who had snapped some of the pictures. I had been in my apartment alone that night, heating leftover pasta, convincing myself there had been no dinner at all. My chest tightened. As I stared at those photos, the comments filled with congratulations and hearts from friends. Not one person asked where I was. I called Mom that night, voice shaking with anger. She tried to soothe me, saying it was better to spend time with people who appreciated me than to beg for scraps from those who didn't. But a part of me still ached because family is supposed to want you there. Family is supposed to notice when you are missing. Rebecca never apologized. She brushed it off with a laugh, saying social media made things look bigger than they were. Yet, in the background, she was careful to remind everyone of her position. She was the organizer, the dependable one, the daughter Dad could count on. Sometimes I wondered if my father even realized how tightly she held the reins. He seemed to trust her completely. When I was around him, our conversations never lasted long often, no more than a few polite questions. How was work, he would ask, without ever asking what kind of projects I was pouring myself into. Then he would pivot back to Rebecca, praising her latest milestone as if she were the only child in the room. I felt the sting of it most sharply when I drove past the glass towers of Sterling Pharma on my way to a client meeting in Bridgeport. The building glimmered in the sun, and I could imagine Rebecca inside heels clicking across the marble floors, colleagues nodding at her in respect. Meanwhile, I sat in my old Honda with my laptop bag beside me, heading to a small cafe where I would pitch designs to a startup that barely had a budget. Yet deep down, I knew my work had value. Clients came back because I listened, because I brought their ideas to life with care. I had built a modest living from nothing, something I was proud of even if my family couldn't see it. Still, the contrast was impossible to ignore. Rebecca's success was paraded at every opportunity while mine was dismissed. It was more than sibling rivalry. It was the way she wielded that image like a weapon, reminding everyone that she belonged at the center while I was always on the edge. The night of Allison's Facebook album stayed with me. I remembered sitting in the dark, scrolling through the pictures again and again, searching for some trace that I had mattered to them. Instead, I found only evidence of how completely I had been erased. Rebecca was skilled at making her version of events the truth. If she told Dad that I was too busy to come, he believed her. If she told Patricia I had other plans, it became fact. She was so certain, so polished, that no one thought to question her. That was the part that cut deepest. Not just her cruelty, but the silence of everyone else. No one picked up the phone to ask me directly. No one said we miss you. It was easier to accept Rebecca's story than to reach for mine. Driving through the snowy streets after being turned away at the door that New Year's Eve, I thought of all those times. Each omission, each vanished invitation, each smirk disguised as concern. It wasn't random. It had been deliberate. I pressed harder on the gas, my jaw tight. The town lights blurred past, and I could almost hear Rebecca's voice in my head, calm and dismissive, telling everyone that Natalie chose not to be there, that Natalie preferred to spend her time elsewhere, that Natalie didn't belong. The truth was, I had always wanted to belong. That was the difference between us. She guarded the gates of our family as if she were protecting a kingdom. And me, I was left wandering outside, clutching memories of a childhood where we once decorated the tree together, before she decided the circle wasn't big enough for two sisters. Snowflakes streaked across my windshield, the wipers swiping them away in steady rhythm. My chest burned with a mix of grief and fury. Somewhere inside that glowing house, my father raised a glass to toast a new year. Rebecca, at his side, her silver dress catching the light. And I drove on knowing she had once again succeeded in making sure I was nowhere in the picture. I had tried to prepare myself in every way I could for that night, convincing myself that effort might soften old wounds. Weeks before New Year's Eve, I had started picking out gifts, each one chosen with careful thought. For Grandma Martha, I found a vintage brooch from an antique shop in Stamford, one that reminded me of the piece she lost years ago. For Patricia, I wrapped a cookbook filled with rustic Italian recipes, because the last time we spoke she mentioned wanting to learn the dishes she had tasted in Rome. For Dad, I chose a leather notebook with his initials engraved on the cover. He always preferred pen and paper over any computer. And even for Rebecca, I bought a soft wool scarf in a shade of blue that I thought might bring out her eyes. The wrapping took me hours, smoothing the paper and folding corners until they lined up neatly. Mom always said presentation was a form of love, so I tied each with ribbon and tucked a handwritten card beneath the bow. In those notes, I didn't write about the pain of the past. I wrote instead about hope, about how maybe this new year could be a turning point. Mom knew what I was doing, of course. She never tried to stop me, but her voice carried warning when she called on Christmas Eve. "Honey," she said gently, "do not put your heart in their hands again. They have cut you before." I told her I understood, but I could hear the worry in her breath. "Grandma is getting older," I reminded her. "I do not want to lose my chance to see her." Mom paused, then whispered that she would be there for me, no matter how the night unfolded. In the middle of all this, work pressed in as well. I had been balancing small freelance projects for months, designing logos and websites that kept the bills paid. Right before New Year's, a new client reached out, a small wellness startup based in New Haven. Their email was short but full of potential, hinting at a long-term contract if my designs impressed them. I answered late at night with enthusiasm, attaching samples of past projects. When their response came back the next morning, they asked for a full proposal by January 2nd. It felt like a door opening, a chance to step into something steadier. That possibility made me think about Rebecca all over again. I knew she had ties to Sterling Pharma, a giant compared to the small company that had reached out to me, but I also knew that every career starts somewhere. The thought of proving myself on my own terms, building something they could not dismiss, fueled me as I finished my proposal drafts, between wrapping gifts and baking a pie to bring along. The morning of New Year's Eve, I woke before dawn, too restless to stay in bed. I laid my dress on the chair, a simple green sweater dress I had chosen weeks earlier, and set the pearl pin on the dresser. The bag of gifts sat ready by the door, stacked neatly with tissue paper peeking out of each bag. My apartment smelled faintly of cinnamon from the pie cooling on the counter. By late afternoon, snow had begun to fall, tiny flakes drifting against my window. I tried on the dress one more time, changed my mind twice, then finally pulled my hair back and slipped on black boots. The pie went into a carrier, the gifts into the back seat, and I started the car with a shiver of nerves. The drive took nearly an hour. Highways were clear at first but narrowed as I approached Greenwood, the houses growing larger, the lawns wider, the lights brighter. I passed the edge of town where Sterling Pharma's offices rose like glass mountains against the pale sky. For a moment, I thought of Rebecca walking those halls, admired and secure, while I drove a modest car toward a house where I was never truly welcome. Halfway through the drive, my phone buzzed with a text from an unfamiliar number. It read simply, "Come early if you can, we are starting soon." My heart skipped. Maybe it was Dad, maybe Allison. I typed back asking who it was, but no reply came. The silence left me uneasy. When I pulled into Greenwood, snow covered the driveways in soft powder. The houses sparkled with elaborate light displays, glowing reindeer on manicured lawns, and wreaths shining under porch lights. Dad's house was no different. Every window lit the roof, outlined in white bulbs. Cars lined the driveway, luxury models parked bumper to bumper. I eased my Civic into a space on the street, telling myself it did not matter that mine looked out of place. I sat for a few minutes before getting out, staring at the windows where shadows moved, glasses raised. Music floated faintly into the night, the familiar hum of a party already in motion. My phone buzzed again, but it was only Sophia sending me a string of hearts and a reminder that she was 10 minutes away if I needed her. I promised her I would be fine, though the pit in my stomach told another story. Gathering the bags and pie, I walked slowly toward the house. Snowflakes brushed my lashes, the air sharp against my cheeks. Each step felt heavier, as if I carried not just gifts, but years of being unwanted. At the door, I paused, shifted the weight in my arms, and pressed the bell. Inside, the chime echoed, laughter swelled. My chest tightened. For a heartbeat, I imagined Dad rushing to open the door, his face lighting up when he saw me. I pictured Grandma Martha pushing back her chair to welcome me. I let myself hope just long enough for the sound of footsteps to draw closer on the other side of the door. The knob turned, the door creaked, and a shadow fell across the light, spilling out onto the porch. I steadied my breath, bracing myself for whatever waited there. Rebecca's face was the first thing I saw, her expression fixed into something that looked almost bored. She leaned against the doorframe's silver dress, gleaming in the light behind her. Her eyes traveled over me, the pie carrier in one hand, and the bags of gifts looped over my arm. For the briefest moment, I thought she might step aside, that maybe she would remember the years we once shared a room and whispered to each other in the dark. Instead, she sighed, rolled her eyes, and said in that clipped voice of hers that cut sharper than any blade, "We don't want you here." I blinked, stunned by the bluntness, by the cold certainty of her words. The sounds of laughter and music swirled from the dining room, voices rising in the countdown to midnight. I tried to speak, but my throat closed, the words lodging somewhere too deep to reach. Rebecca shifted her weight, one manicured hand resting on the door, as if to shut it in my face. Behind her shoulder, I caught a glimpse of the family gathered plates, piled high, glasses clinking. My father's head was thrown back in laughter at something Uncle Frederick had said. Patricia moved between the table and kitchen with practiced ease. Allison leaned close to Bradley, smiling at something only he could hear. Grandma sat at the far end of the table, her back straight, her face lit by the glow of the chandelier. No one turned. No one noticed me standing outside with snow gathering in my hair. My arms felt like lead. The weight of the gifts once chosen with hope became unbearable. My lips trembled, but I forced them into a small nod. "Got it," I said, barely above a whisper. Rebecca's mouth curled into something that looked like triumph as she pushed the door closed. The latch clicked, sealing me out, leaving only the echo of my own breath in the freezing air. I walked back down the steps slowly, my boots crunching against the shoveled walkway. Snow fell harder now, landing cold on my cheeks, stinging against skin already raw with humiliation. At the curb, my hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the keys. When I finally slid into the driver's seat, I placed the gifts on the passenger side, with a thud, and gripped the wheel, my knuckles turning white. For a moment, I just sat there staring at the glowing windows. Through the curtain, I saw the shadow of my grandmother lift her hand toward the glass, as if she might brush it aside. Then she vanished, lost again in the swirl of figures around the table. My chest tightened so painfully I pressed a fist against it, trying to breathe. The phone buzzed in my pocket, startling me. Sophia's name lit up the screen. I swiped quickly, her voice rushing into the quiet. "Are you inside yet?" she asked. "Did it go okay?" I opened my mouth, but nothing came. The silence stretched until finally I managed. "They didn't let me in." Her shock was instant, her voice rising. "What do you mean they didn't let you in?" "Rebecca told me to leave," I whispered. "She said they didn't want me there." They were already at the table, already celebrating. Dad didn't even look up. Sophia cursed under her breath. "I'm coming right now. Where are you parked?" "No," I said quickly, wiping at the tears that had slipped down my cheeks without permission. "Don't come." "I just need a minute." "Natalie," she said firmly, her voice carrying the weight of our years of friendship. "You don't deserve this." I know I said, though the words sounded hollow. I ended the call before she could argue, setting the phone face down on the seat. Silence filled the car, broken only by the ticking of the engine. I wanted to scream, to pound my fists against the wheel, to demand answers from a world that seemed determined to remind me I was expendable. Instead, I sat there and let the sobs come sharp and uneven until my throat ached. Through the blur of tears, I glanced at the gifts piled beside me. The brooch for Grandma, the notebook for Dad, the scarf for Rebecca. All of them mocked me, now symbols of how foolish I had been to believe kindness could bridge the gap. Headlights flashed in the rearview mirror. Across the street, in the warm glow of her living room, Dad's neighbor Catherine peered out her window. I imagined her already reaching for her phone, ready to share with the neighborhood that James Cooper's youngest daughter had shown up uninvited, only to be turned away. Shame burned my face hotter than the heater blasting against my legs. I turned the key and eased the car into drive. My tires crunched over the snow as I pulled away from the curb, the house shrinking behind me. I wanted to outrun the image of them laughing without me, the sound of Rebecca's voice shutting me out like a slammed gate. The streets blurred as I drove, aimless headlights cutting through the dark. Anger swirled with grief in my chest, heavy and unrelenting. Every slight I had ever endured piled onto the moment, memories of holidays, spent waiting for invitations that never came, of excuses that explained away my absence, until even I began to question if I belonged. I wiped my face with the back of my hand, forcing myself to breathe steady. I couldn't let Rebecca see me broken, even if she would never know I was crying in the car outside. I couldn't let her win like that. I drove for blocks before realizing I had no destination. Snow coated the streets, muffling the world, leaving only the hum of the engine and the thud of my heart. My phone buzzed again, messages from Sophia lighting the screen, but I couldn't bring myself to read them. Not yet. All I knew was that I had to keep moving away from the house where I had been dismissed, as if I were nothing. The night stretched ahead, empty and uncertain, as I gripped the wheel tighter and let the darkness swallow me whole. Inside that warm house, the celebration pressed forward as if nothing had happened at the front door. Rebecca returned to the dining room, shoulders squared, a practiced smile on her lips. She slid into her chair as if she had only stepped away to check the oven. Dad lifted his glass toward her and asked if everything was all right. She nodded, eyes sparkling with a lie, and told the table that I had called earlier to say I was too busy, that I had chosen to spend the evening with Mom. The clink of silverware filled the room again, conversations resuming as if her words had settled the matter. Patricia offered more potatoes to Uncle Frederick, who nodded with approval. Allison and Bradley exchanged glances across the table, a flicker of doubt passing between them. Grandma Martha's fork paused mid-air, her sharp eyes narrowing at Rebecca before she set it back down with deliberate calm. Dad leaned back in his chair, satisfied with Rebecca's explanation, and returned to his laughter. He had always been quick to trust her, to believe that her polished confidence meant she knew best. I could almost picture him brushing aside the faint crease of worry that crossed Patricia's face when she glanced toward the door. Grandma cleared her throat. It was not loud, but it cut through the chatter. She fixed her gaze on Rebecca, her voice soft but steady. "That does not sound like Natalie." Rebecca blinked, her smile faltering just a second before she recovered. "She has her own life, Grandma. You know how she island, always busy with her little projects." The room grew quiet at the word, little hanging in the air, heavier than any toast. Allison shifted in her chair, staring down at her plate. Bradley tapped his fork against his glass absent-mindedly, eyes fixed on Rebecca with the faintest trace of disapproval. Grandma's hand trembled as she reached for her water glass. She set it down untouched and looked directly at Dad. "James," she said, her tone sharper now, "did you hear from Natalie yourself?" Dad frowned, caught off guard, and shook his head. "No, Rebecca told us." Then you should have called, Grandma replied. Her voice had gained strength, each word landing like a stone in the stillness. You should have asked her. For a moment, Dad looked as if he might argue, but the weight of his mother's gaze silenced him. The room shifted uneasily. Patricia folded her napkin, her lips pressed thin. Allison finally spoke, her voice careful. I tried calling Natalie last week, but the number I have must be old. She never answered. Rebecca cut in quickly, eager to redirect. She changes phones all the time. Hard to keep track. Bradley raised his eyebrows, not convinced. That's strange, he said slowly. I saw her post new design work online just a few days ago. Looked like the same number linked to her profile. Rebecca's jaw tightened, but she forced another smile. You know how unreliable those things can be. The conversation stumbled back into safer topics, but the tension lingered like a shadow. Grandma kept her eyes on her plate, not touching the food. The sparkle of the chandelier glinted against her brooch, one that looked so much like the one I had chosen for her, sitting uselessly in the bag on my car seat. Outside snow continued to fall, blanketing the yard, while inside the family laughed and ate as if nothing had cracked the surface. Yet under that laughter there was unease. A small thread of doubt had been pulled, and no matter how Rebecca tried to smooth it, the edges were beginning to fray. Patricia rose to clear plates, her hands steady but her face pale. As she passed behind Grandma's chair, she laid a gentle hand on her shoulder. Grandma reached up and patted it, but her eyes never left Rebecca. Later in the evening, as the clock inched closer to midnight, Dad stood to make a toast. He spoke of family, of the blessings of another year together, of how proud he was of all of them. Glasses lifted, smiles returned. But Grandma's hand remained flat on the table, her glass untouched, her expression solemn. Rebecca leaned toward Allison, whispering something too quiet for others to hear. Allison nodded politely, but her eyes flicked toward the doorway, as if expecting me to appear at any moment. Grandma broke her silence once more before the toast ended. I will ask Natalie myself tomorrow, she said simply. Her voice carried over the clinking glasses, calm but immovable. Rebecca froze, her smile rigid. The words landed like a promise, one she could not smooth over with practiced charm. Midnight was drawing near, but under the glitter and warmth of that dining room, the air had shifted. The lie had been spoken, and no matter how carefully Rebecca wrapped it, the first crack had been heard. I drove until the lights of Greenwood blurred into the snowy night, and the anger in my chest gave way to a hollow kind of exhaustion. The windshield wipers beat a steady rhythm as I passed darkened shops and quiet houses. I did not know where I was heading, only that I could not bear to circle back to my apartment with gifts still sitting on the passenger seat, each ribbon, a reminder of how unwanted I was. The streets opened up near the edge of town where the Riverside Community Center stood, an old brick church converted into a gathering place. Its windows glowed with a warm light, and cars were scattered across the lot. I slowed, instinctively drawn to the sound of laughter that spilled faintly into the cold air. My eyes caught a hand-painted banner by the door that read New Year's dinner. I parked and sat for a moment, the engine humming beneath me. The bag of gifts loomed beside me, heavy with rejection. Maybe I thought they could still matter to someone. I gathered them into my arms, stepped into the crisp air, and walked toward the entrance. Snowflakes clung to my coat as the door swung open, held by a woman with curly gray hair and a bright red sweater. Looks like Santa needed a hand, she said with a smile that reached her eyes. I managed a small laugh, introducing myself, and explained that I had some gifts I wanted to donate. Her name was Rachel, the volunteer coordinator. She ushered me inside, where the smell of roast turkey and apple pie drifted through the hall. Long tables were set up, filled with people of all ages. Some wore heavy coats that looked like they had seen too many winters. Others had the tired faces of those carrying burdens too heavy for celebration. Yet there was laughter here, and the kind of togetherness I had been chasing all evening. Rachel clapped her hands when she saw the bags. Perfect timing, she said. We were short on gifts this year, and these will help more than you know. She set them on a table near a modest Christmas tree decorated with handmade ornaments, then asked if I wanted to stay for dinner. I hesitated only a moment before nodding. Actually, if you need extra hands, I could help. Her smile widened as she handed me an apron printed with candy canes. You are more than welcome. For the next hour, I poured water-carried plates and sliced pie. I met a young mother named Lily, who had 2 children tugging at her sleeves. She told me she had left an abusive marriage just 3 months earlier and was starting fresh in a city where she knew no one. I listened as she spoke, her voice, wavering but steady, and I felt my own pain shift into perspective. At another table sat Harold, a veteran in his 80s, with kind eyes and a weathered smile. When I refilled his coffee, he patted my hand and asked why I looked so sad. The words tumbled out before I could stop them. I told him about being turned away at my father's door, about the years of being pushed aside, about the ache of wanting to belong. Family can be who you are born to or who you choose, he said softly. Looks to me like you are making good choices tonight. His words sank deep, thawing something in me that had been frozen since Rebecca shut the door in my face. I looked around the room at the strangers sharing food and laughter and realized I felt more welcome here than I had in years with my own blood. As I carried another tray of pie, I caught my reflection in the window. My cheeks were flushed from the warmth inside my hair, loose around my face, and for the first time that night I did not look broken. I looked present, alive. Near midnight, the tables buzzed with anticipation. Someone set out paper horns and plastic cups filled with sparkling cider. Rachel stood near the front, thanking everyone for coming, her voice full of warmth. I felt a lump rise in my throat, remembering how badly I had wanted to hear those words from my own family. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, expecting another message from Sophia, but the screen lit with a name I did not expect. It was Dad. 3 missed calls, then another coming through. My stomach twisted as I stared at it, frozen in place with the pie server still in my hand. Rachel noticed my hesitation. You can take it in the side room if you need privacy, she said gently. I nodded, stepping away as I pressed answer. Dad's voice burst through, frantic and uneven. Natalie, thank God, he said. Where are you? I froze, unable to find my words. Why, I managed. Why are you calling me now? There has been an emergency, he said, his breath heavy. It is Grandma. Her blood pressure shot up. The paramedics are here. She is asking for you. The room around me, blurred voices and laughter fading into silence. My hand tightened around the phone, heart pounding in my chest. I whispered that I was on my way already, reaching for my coat, already knowing that whatever pain I carried would have to wait. Grandma needed me. I hurried out of the community center into the falling snow, the phone still pressed to my ear. My breath came out in sharp clouds as I asked Dad what hospital they were taking her to. He named St. Vincent's, the same hospital where Mom worked nights, and my chest tightened. I promised I was on my way, and hung up before my voice could betray the panic rising in me. Sophia was already outside, waiting in her red coat, her car idling at the curb. She must have driven over when she saw I was not answering her messages. She rolled down the window and called my name, her face full of concern. I slid into the passenger seat, my hands trembling. Grandma is sick, I said quickly. The paramedics are taking her to St. Vincent's. Sophia pressed her foot on the gas without hesitation, guiding the car through the slick streets. Snow had built up along the curbs and headlights reflected off the icy pavement. I pressed my palms together in my lap, whispering under my breath that she had to be all right, that I could not lose her now. The drive felt endless, though it was less than 15 minutes. I kept seeing Grandma's face in my mind, the way she always looked at me as if I mattered, as if I was worth listening to, even when no one else thought so. My chest ached with the thought that I might not have much time left with her. When we pulled into the hospital lot, flashing red and blue lights lit the entrance. An ambulance was parked at the curb, its back doors open, as paramedics lifted a stretcher down. I recognized the figure under the blanket instantly. Grandma's white hair framed her face, pale against the oxygen mask. Dad stood nearby, his hair dusted with snow, his expression frantic. He rushed forward as I stepped out of the car, his voice breaking. Natalie, thank God you came. She's been asking for you non-stop. I pushed past him and hurried to the stretcher. Grandma's eyes fluttered open as I reached for her hand. It felt cold, frail, but she squeezed my fingers with surprising strength. "You came," she whispered, her voice muffled through the mask. "Of course I came," I said, tears stinging my eyes. "I will not leave you." The paramedics pushed her inside, and I stayed at her side, never letting go of her hand. Sophia followed quietly behind her presence, steady like an anchor. Dad trailed us, fumbling for his phone, calling Allison and Bradley to let them know where to meet. Inside the emergency department, the staff moved quickly, checking her blood pressure, adjusting the oxygen. I stood against the wall, feeling both in the way and unwilling to step aside. Grandma's gaze kept finding me, her eyes soft with relief, even as the monitors beeped around her. Within half an hour, Allison rushed in, still in her coat, her stethoscope looped around her neck. She looked every bit the doctor she was becoming. She took one look at Grandma's chart, then at me. "The medication is helping," she said, her voice calm but serious. "Her blood pressure is stabilizing, but she needs to rest." Dad sank into a chair, covering his face with his hands. Bradley arrived minutes later, pacing by the window, phone clutched tight as if waiting for bad news. Patricia followed quietly, her mascara smudged her hands, wringing the strap of her purse. The door opened again, and Rebecca entered, her heels clicking against the tile. She stopped short when she saw me standing there, her eyes narrowing. "What is she doing here?" she demanded, her voice sharp. The room went silent. Even the paramedic who was charting paused. Dad looked up, his face drained. "She has every right to be here," he said hoarsely. "She is family." Rebecca's glare cut into me like ice. "After everything, after she refused our invitation, you let her stand here as if she belongs." I felt the heat rush to my face, anger surging through my chest. "I never refused," I said, my voice trembling with fury. "You turned me away." Rebecca opened her mouth, but Grandma's voice, faint but clear-cut through the tension. "Enough." The room stilled. Grandma shifted slightly, her hand gripping mine tighter. "No more lies tonight." Her words left no room for argument. Dad lowered his head. Patricia turned away, pressing a tissue to her eyes. Allison stepped closer to the bed, her jaw set, her gaze flicking between us. Grandma lifted her mask just enough to speak again. "Family is not built on lies," she said softly. "If we cannot speak the truth, then we have nothing." Her strength in that moment, even as her body weakened, silenced every protest. Rebecca's face flushed red, but she said nothing, her lips pressed into a thin line. I stood there with Grandma's hand in mine, my heart pounding, the weight of years of silence pressing down on me. Something had shifted. The lies that had kept me out were finally unraveling, and there was no turning back. The hallway outside Grandma's room felt heavy with tension. Rebecca paced near the vending machine, her heels tapping angrily against the linoleum, while Dad sat slumped in a plastic chair with his elbows on his knees. Patricia whispered to Allison, her hands trembling, as if she wanted to hold the family together with sheer will. I stayed close to Grandma's door, listening to the steady beep of the monitor inside each sound, a reminder that she was still with us. Rebecca suddenly spun toward me, her voice sharp enough to slice through the silence. "You had no right to come here after the way you treated this family." I felt the anger rise like fire in my chest. "Treated this family," I repeated, my voice shaking. "You shut the door in my face tonight. You made sure I missed years of dinners, holidays, birthdays. Do not twist this on me." She folded her arms, her eyes cold. "You always play the victim. Maybe if you had shown up, if you had tried harder, you would have been included." I laughed bitterly, the sound foreign even to my own ears. "Tried harder, Rebecca. I was standing on the porch with gifts in my arms when you told me I was not wanted. How much harder could I try?" Bradley, who had been leaning against the wall, finally spoke. His voice was low but carried weight. "I saw Natalie's work online last week. She has been working non-stop, building something from nothing. She is not the one who failed this family." Rebecca's face tightened. "You do not know the whole story," she snapped. Allison crossed her arms, her gaze steady. "Then, tell us, Rebecca. Tell us why Natalie never saw the invitations, why her number suddenly stopped working for all of us." Rebecca hesitated, her lips parting and closing again. But before she could answer, the nurse stepped into the hall. "Only one at a time with her, please," the nurse said kindly. "She needs rest." Grandma's voice carried from inside, weak but insistent. "Natalie stays." The nurse nodded and motioned for me to go in. I slipped into the room, the door clicking softly shut behind me. The harsh fluorescent lights had been dimmed, leaving the room washed in a softer glow. Grandma looked small in the hospital bed, but her eyes were sharp as they followed me to the chair beside her. She reached for my hand again, her grip steadier than before. "Do not let her break you," she whispered. "I know the truth. I always knew." Tears threatened, but I swallowed them back, afraid to add to her worry. "I just want you to be okay," I said softly. She gave a faint smile, one corner of her mouth lifting. "I will fight as long as I can. But tonight showed me something." Her voice faltered, then steadied. "Lies cannot hold forever." I rested my forehead lightly against her hand, letting the warmth of her touch ground me. She had always been the one who saw me, who reminded me I was not invisible. The door creaked, and Allison slipped inside quietly. She looked between us, her expression conflicted. "Grandma, the doctor said you need sleep." Grandma closed her eyes but did not let go of my hand. "Just a little longer," she murmured. Allison moved closer to the bed, lowering her voice. "I need to say this. Natalie, I believed Rebecca when she said you were too busy for us. I should have called you directly. I am sorry." Her apology landed with surprising weight. For years I had wanted just one person to admit they had overlooked me, that my absence had not been my choice. "Thank you," I whispered. Allison blinked back tears, then glanced at Grandma. "We cannot keep letting Rebecca dictate who belongs here. It is not right." Grandma's eyes opened again, glinting with something fierce. "No, it is not. And when I am stronger, there will be changes." Before I could ask what she meant, the nurse reappeared, insisting Grandma needed rest. Allison and I left quietly, pulling the door shut behind us. In the hallway, Rebecca was waiting, arms crossed, her chin lifted defiantly. "Did she tell you anything?" she demanded, her tone edged with fear beneath the arrogance. I stared at her for a long moment, the anger inside me simmering. "She told me the truth matters," I said simply. "That is enough." Rebecca's eyes narrowed, but for the first time she looked uncertain, as if the foundation she had built her power on was beginning to crack. Dad stood slowly, his face pale, his voice hoarse. "We will talk about this tomorrow," he said. "Tonight is about Mom." The words sounded like a truce, but I knew tomorrow would bring more than just talk. Something had shifted, and none of us could go back. Morning light filtered through the blinds of my small apartment when my phone began to buzz. I reached for it, still half asleep, and saw Allison's name flashing across the screen. Her voice came through urgent and shaky. "Natalie, you need to come to the house. Now." I sat up instantly, my heart pounding. "What happened?" She hesitated before answering. "Grandma is awake and she wants to see you. But Rebecca is here too, and things are getting ugly." I was out of bed in seconds, pulling on jeans and a sweater, my hands trembling as I grabbed my keys. The drive to Maplewood felt longer than ever. The closer I got, the more I dreaded what kind of storm was waiting. When I arrived, the front door was slightly ajar. Voices carried from the living room, sharp and heated. I stepped inside and froze. Grandma sat upright on the sofa, still pale but alert, her oxygen tube in place. Rebecca stood near the fireplace, red-faced, while Dad and Patricia tried unsuccessfully to calm her. Grandma's voice cut through the chaos. "Enough." Everyone went silent, the authority in her tone undeniable, even in her weakened state. Her eyes shifted to me the moment I entered. "Natalie, come sit beside me." I obeyed, perching carefully next to her. She reached for my hand, her grip surprisingly firm. "I want everyone to hear what I am about to say." Rebecca scoffed, folding her arms. "Mom, you are not thinking clearly." Grandma fixed her with a glare. "I have never been more clear. For years I believed you when you told me Natalie was too busy or uninterested. I believed you when you said she had distanced herself. But last night proved otherwise. You shut her out. You lied to all of us. Rebecca's face flushed. I did it for the good of the family. She was a distraction, a reminder of mistakes we should have left behind. The room bristled with tension. Dad ran a hand over his face. Rebecca, do you realize what you have done? You kept my daughter from us. Rebecca turned on him, her voice sharp. You were the one who moved on so quickly after the divorce. You wanted a clean slate. I made sure you had it. My chest tightened. So it was true. She had erased me because I did not fit her idea of a perfect family. Grandma shook her head, her voice steady. No, Rebecca. What you did was about control. You wanted to decide who belonged and who did not. That is not family. That is cruelty. Bradley stepped forward from the corner where he had been watching quietly. I think it is time we admit Natalie deserves the truth. All of it. All eyes turned toward him. He swallowed hard, then looked at me. Rebecca intercepted more than invitations. She took letters, gifts, even money Grandma tried to send you over the years. The words hit me like a blow. My throat closed and I could barely get the question out. What do you mean? Grandma's face crumpled with grief. I tried to support you, sweetheart. I mailed checks for your tuition care packages, birthday cards. When you never responded, I thought you were angry with me. My stomach twisted as I remembered the nights in college when I struggled to pay for books, the times I went without heat because my paycheck barely covered rent. All while Grandma believed I was rejecting her kindness. I turned to Rebecca, my voice low but fierce. How could you? She shrugged, though her eyes flickered with something close to guilt. You did fine without it. Look at you now. The sheer audacity of her words made me tremble with rage. Fine without it. I nearly lost everything trying to survive. Allison spoke up then, her tone sharp. This is fraud, Rebecca. Stealing mail cashing checks, that is a crime. The room fell silent at her words. Rebecca's face paled. You would not turn on your own blood, she whispered. Grandma's voice cut in again, trembling but resolute. You turned on us first. Dad straightened his jaw tight. Rebecca, leave. For a moment she looked around the room, searching for an ally but found none. Even Patricia avoided her gaze. Finally, with a scoff and a muttered curse, she grabbed her coat and stormed out, the slam of the front door shaking the walls. The silence left in her wake was heavy. I sat there stunned, still holding Grandma's hand. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. I am so sorry for everything you lost because of this. I shook my head, my own tears spilling over. It was not your fault. Dad lowered himself onto the armchair across from us. His face looked older, lined with regret. I failed you too, Natalie. I should have questioned things, should have checked in more. I let myself believe the easy story instead of the hard truth. Hearing him admit it broke something open inside me. For years, I had waited for acknowledgement, for someone to finally see how deeply I had been hurt. And now, sitting in that living room with the faint smell of pine from the Christmas trees still lingering, I felt the weight of both grief and relief. Allison leaned forward. Natalie, we want you back. No more secrets, no more lies. Bradley nodded. You belong here as much as any of us. I wiped my cheeks, my voice unsteady. I do not know if I can just forget everything that happened. Grandma squeezed my hand. You do not have to forget. You just have to decide if you want to move forward. The clock on the mantel chimed softly, marking the late morning hour. Outside, snow began to fall again, coating the street in a quiet white blanket. For the first time in years, I felt that maybe there was a path towards something better. But I also knew Rebecca would not let go so easily. A week later, I found myself standing in front of the Riverside Community Center again, but this time I was not alone. Dad was beside me, his hands shoved awkwardly into the pockets of his wool coat, while Allison and Bradley carried trays of food Patricia had prepared. Grandma insisted on coming too, despite her doctor's orders to rest, and she sat in her wheelchair with a knitted blanket across her lap, her eyes bright with determination. The center looked different in daylight. The snow had been cleared from the walkway, and children's drawings taped to the windows fluttered slightly in the breeze as we entered. Rachel spotted me immediately and hurried over, her smile widening when she saw the whole family trailing behind. "You came back," she said warmly, "and you brought an army." I laughed, feeling a swell of pride. "This is my family. They wanted to help." Rachel's eyes softened. "That means more than you know." We spent the morning unpacking dishes, arranging tables, and serving meals. I moved easily through the crowd, greeting the people I had met on Christmas. Harold raised his coffee cup in greeting, and Lily introduced me to her little boy, who clung shyly to her leg. Dad carried trays back and forth from the kitchen, without complaint, his face flushed from the effort, but lit with a quiet resolve. At one point, I caught Grandma watching him, her lips pressed together in an expression that was half sorrow, half pride. She motioned me over. "He is trying," she said quietly. "Maybe not in the ways you needed before, but he is trying now." I nodded, my chest tightening. I wanted to believe it. I wanted to let this be enough. Later in the afternoon, Rachel called me aside. "Natalie, would you be willing to say a few words to everyone? Just something about what today means to you." My heart thudded. I had never been comfortable speaking in front of a crowd, but I looked around the room filled with strangers who had become something more, and with my family who finally stood beside me. I drew in a deep breath. I told them about the pain of being turned away, about the gifts I had brought that ended up here instead, and about the unexpected grace I had found in this place. I spoke of second chances of belonging, and of how family could be chosen just as much as it could be given. My voice wavered but grew steadier as I saw people nodding, their eyes reflecting pieces of my own journey. When I finished, the room broke into gentle applause. Grandma's eyes shone with tears, Allison squeezed my shoulder, and even Dad looked humbled, his head bowed slightly, as if the weight of the truth had finally settled on him. After the event ended, we stayed behind to help clean up. Patricia surprised me by suggesting we make the center part of our holiday tradition. "They gave us so much perspective," she said. "It feels right to give back." I studied her face, searching for insincerity, but found none. Maybe she too had been caught in Rebecca's shadow all these years. On the drive back to Dad's house, the conversation turned to practical matters. Allison suggested creating a new system for family communication, one that did not rely on any single person. Bradley offered to set up a shared calendar online. Dad agreed readily, and even Patricia added that she wanted to be part of it. Grandma listened silently, her hand resting on mine, her presence a steady reminder that change was possible. That evening, I received a text from Sophia. "How did it go?" I sent her a picture of us at the center, smiling awkwardly but genuinely. She replied almost instantly. "Looks like a new chapter, Audrey." The words made me pause. A new chapter. That was what it felt like. Not a perfect ending, not a fairy tale reunion, but the fragile beginning of something different. But deep down, I knew the shadow of Rebecca still lingered. She had left the house in fury and had not spoken to anyone since. Part of me feared her silence more than her words. As I stood by the window that night, looking out at the snow-covered street, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a number I did not recognize. I hesitated before opening the message. "You think you've won, Natalie, but this isn't over." The message burned in my hand as I stared at the screen, my stomach sinking. I read the words again and again, hoping I had imagined them, but they stayed the same, sharp and bitter. "You think you've won, Natalie, but this isn't over." I sat on the edge of my bed, the quiet of my apartment pressing in around me. My first instinct was fear. Then anger followed, hot and heavy in my chest. Rebecca had already taken so much from me. I was not about to let her steal my peace, too. The next morning, I called Allison. I told her about the message, my voice shaking despite my best efforts. There was a pause, then she spoke firmly. "Natalie, save that message. If she tries anything else, we will have proof." Her calm steadiness grounded me. I promised I would. For days, I half expected Rebecca to show up at my door or cause a scene at Dad's house. But she did not. Instead, her silence stretched on. In that space, my family began to heal. Grandma was released from the hospital and came to stay with Allison for a few weeks. I visited almost every day. We sat at her kitchen table drinking tea while she told me stories I had never heard before, about her childhood in Kansas, about the first house she bought with Grandpa, about raising Dad and Rebecca. Hearing the fullness of her life made me realize just how much I had missed by being shut out. One snowy Saturday, Dad invited me over for dinner. When I arrived, the table was already set with mismatched plates and candles that Patricia had lit. Bradley was helping in the kitchen, and Allison had brought a pie. It felt different, more relaxed than the stiff gatherings of my childhood. When Dad asked me to carve the roast, my throat tightened with unexpected emotion. It was such a simple thing, but it felt like belonging. Later that evening, as we lingered over dessert, Grandma cleared her throat. "I want us to make something clear tonight," she said, her voice steady. "No one in this family will ever be shut out again. If we have issues, we deal with them directly. No more secrets, no more whispers." Everyone nodded. I looked around the table at the faces of people who had hurt me, ignored me, but were finally beginning to change. I felt both cautious and hopeful. 2 weeks later, I returned to the community center, this time with my whole family in tow. We served meals, played board games with kids, and listened to stories from people who reminded us what resilience looked like. Dad even pledged a donation that would cover meals for the next year. Watching him shake hands with Harold and laugh with Lily's little boy filled me with something I had not felt in years' pride. On New Year's Eve, I hosted a small gathering at my apartment. Grandma sat in her favorite chair, wrapped in a blanket I had knitted years ago. Allison and Bradley brought snacks. Patricia made her famous spinach dip, and Dad helped me hang twinkling lights around the living room. Sophia arrived last, arms full of sparkling cider, her grin as bright as ever. As midnight approached, we gathered near the window to watch fireworks blooming across the city skyline. The air buzzed with warmth and laughter. Grandma raised her glass of cider. "To second chances," she said. "To family found again." I looked around at the faces illuminated by the glow of fireworks, at the mix of old and new bonds forming in my tiny apartment. For the first time in a long time, I felt whole. Rebecca's shadow still lingered in the background of my thoughts, but I knew I was no longer that girl sitting in a car outside the house sobbing alone. I had found my voice, my place, and a community that embraced me. Whatever came next, I would face it with strength. As the clock struck midnight, Sophia squeezed my hand. "This year is going to be different," she whispered. I believed her. If you have ever been shut out by family or faced rejection during the holidays, I hope my story gave you strength. Share in the comments if you've ever had to rebuild trust or start over. And if you want to hear more stories about resilience, justice, and finding your place, make sure to like this video and subscribe. Your voice matters here, and you are not alone.